Good morning. The committee will please come to order. A quorum being present, and I'm pleased to call this morning's meeting of the Committee on Small Business to order. In our first legislative markup of the 116th Congress, we'll be addressing reforms to assist America's 30 million small businesses continue to be engines of economic growth. These small firms employ nearly 50% of all private sector employees in the U.S., making it imperative to the American economy that they succeed. That is why recent surveys showing small business optimism slipping is incredibly concerning. The most recent one released on Monday found that economic outlooks have fallen by 7 percentage points since last fall. Such news merits our attention because small businesses are central to our mission. Being the only committee dedicated solely to the needs of small firms, we remain committed on working to promote policies that will encourage economic prosperity on Main Street. I believe today's markup does just that by addressing timely issues facing small businesses across the country, from strengthening our communities after natural disaster to guarding small businesses against cyber threats and ensuring that growing firms can continue to do business with the federal government. Access to capital is essential for small business success, and this particularly true after a natural disaster. No matter the scope or the cost of a disaster, the first few weeks are critical to a small firm's recovery. The first bill today recognizes how critical it is to get money into a victim's hands to ensure they have every opportunity to rebuild their lives. By permanently increasing the threshold for collateral on disaster loans exceeding $25,000, more victims can readily access funds without fear, and SBA can disburse disaster loans quickly to maximize small business survival post-disaster. The second bill we will discuss today also touches on an important issue for all small employers: transparency of compliance assistance resources. Small businesses don't always have the resources to navigate multiple agencies' websites to understand their responsibility under new laws. Instead, they're worried about meeting payroll, hiring talented workers, and running the day-to-day operations of their small firms. This bill provides a centralized location to make it easier for business owners to find agency, regulatory compliance guides, and contact information. Another area we can serve our nation's small firms is in cybersecurity. America's entrepreneurs have always been vital to technological growth and advancement, but they have also been vulnerable to cyber attacks and data breaches. 3 pieces of legislation we are marking up today address this very issue and will make valuable strides to establish a variety of tools to help businesses keep themselves safe from hackers and guarantee their data is secure when they interact with the SBA and their resource partners. A final issue of concern is the implementation of the Small Business Runway Extension Act, which passed into law in December. The purpose of that law was to make it easier for small federal contractors to transition to an open marketplace. Unfortunately, the law's implementation has been delayed, leaving much uncertainty for small firms. A bill before us today clearly and unequivocally states Congress' intention regarding the Runway Extension Act. It also provides a temporary transition period to ease current ambiguity during implementation of the law. Each of these pieces of legislation are critical to making it easier for employers to do what they do best: operate their businesses, create jobs, and invest in local communities. As a result of numerous meetings with our constituents and several hearings on these issues, the committee today is considering 6 pieces of legislation. H.R. 277, the Access to Sufficient Capital for Everyone in Natural Disaster Areas Act of 2019, introduced by myself and co-sponsored by Ranking Member Chabot. H.R. 2142, a bill to ease regulatory compliance for small businesses, introduced by Mr. Delgado and co-sponsored by Dr. Joyce. H.R. 1649, the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act of 2019, introduced by Ranking Member Chabot and co-sponsored by Mr. Evans. H.R. 1648, the Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2019, introduced by Ranking Member Chabot and co-sponsored by myself. H.R. 2331, the SBA Cyber Awareness Act of 2019, introduced by Mr. Crow and co-sponsored by Mr. Barderson. And H.R. 2345, the Clarifying the Small Business Runway Extension Act of 2019, introduced by Mr. Stabler and co-sponsored by Mr. Golden. As we have done many times in the past, the bills before us today are brought in a bipartisan fashion. Both the ranking member and I support each of the 6 bills to be marked up today. However, before we get into the substance of the bills, I want to thank ranking member and his staff for working in a bipartisan way on this package. I would also like to thank all the members, both Republican and Democrat, for their hard work and continued bipartisan commitment to putting small businesses first. In the interest of time, I would now like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Chabot, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, and good morning. And we thank the Chairwoman for holding this bipartisan markup. It's truly refreshing with everything else that's going on in Congress and the administration to come to this committee and actually work together in producing legislation that will have a positive effect on America's small businesses and the economy overall. And I just happened to come from the Judiciary Committee, and we were discussing, of course, the Attorney General coming there to testify tomorrow on a less bipartisan topic, and I would just say that it's a less collegial environment in there this morning. So it really is a breath of fresh air to come to this committee. The American economy continues to be on a roll. Just last Friday, the Commerce Department announced that the GDP growth for the previous quarter was 3.2%, which exceeded expectations. The stock market has hit record high after record high, helping more Americans build wealth and secure their futures. Last Congress, we passed the most comprehensive tax overhaul in a generation and unburdened the American economy with the repeal of unnecessary and onerous regulations. Those actions, among others, have created an economy that's seen unemployment levels at or near record lows, small business optimism among the highest that we've ever seen, and wages growing faster than they have in a decade. And I would note that unemployment among African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans is literally at record all-time lows. But we're not here to be complacent and simply watch from the sidelines. We're here today to consider legislation, we believe, in a bipartisan manner that will help propel our economy to ever higher heights. Our committee has continued its work on important subjects like increasing access to capital for small firms, expanding government contracting opportunities for small businesses, and ensuring that small entities can be safe and secure in cyberspace in the new gig economy. That is what these bills today address, and I'll talk a little more about each as they come up, but as has been our committee's custom over the last several years, each of these bills are bipartisan, and they all have my support, and I want to thank the Chairwoman for proposing them along with members of this committee on both sides. Again, thank the Chairwoman for holding this markup and yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. Before we get into the individual bills, are there any members present who seek recognition for the purpose of making an opening statement? Seeing none, we will move on to our first bill, H.R. 277, the Access to Sufficient Capital for Everyone in Natural Disaster Areas Act of 2019, also called the Ascent Act, introduced by myself and the ranking member, Mr. Chabot of Ohio. The SBA's Disaster Assistance Program was implemented for the purpose of providing timely financial assistance in the form of low-interest loans and working capital for businesses and homeowners devastated by a disaster. Continual improvement and modernization of the program has been a priority of this committee for many years. And as we continue to experience increased disaster, both in frequency and strength, it is imperative Congress provides the necessary policies to get communities back on their feet. One of those policies originated in my bill, H.R. 208, the Recovery Improvement for Small Entities After Disaster Act of 2015, the RISE Act. That law raised the collateralization threshold on disaster loans to make it easier for victims to obtain capital to rebuild their home and businesses. Unfortunately, that provision was set to expire last year until a one-year extension was enacted. My bill, H.R. 277, will permanently raise the minimum disaster loan amount that the SBA may require collateral from $14,000 to $25,000. Raising the unsecured loan amount will provide support for Americans when they need it most. This means that a disaster victim can continue to receive a $25,000 loan rather than just $14,000 within 5 days of closing to speed up the reconstruction project. And for small businesses, time and again, we have seen that in the aftermath of a disaster, access to affordable and accessible credit can make the difference between remaining in business or closing their doors and putting Americans out of work. It is a common sense move and one supported by the Small Business Administration. In a report assessing the SBA disaster loan program, the SBA recommended that an increase in the unsecured loan limit for disaster loans should be made permanent. The agency again stated as much in a congressional testimony at a hearing held last September in this committee, and it's in fiscal year 2020 budget legislative proposals. Without this legislation, the unsecured loan limit for agency declarations will revert to the lower limits and create an unfair discrepancy for disaster survivors in areas of an SBA declaration and that of a major disaster declaration. Permanency guarantees that disaster funds will apply equally to disaster victims no matter the declaration type. I thank Ranking Member Chabot for co-sponsoring this legislation, which allows more borrowers to access loans without having to put up collateral. I would now like to recognize the Ranking Member for his statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for working in a bipartisan fashion introducing H.R. 277. When natural disasters strike the country, the SBA offers individuals and businesses low-interest and fixed-rate loans to recover and rebuild. The SBA is tasked to work in an organized and efficient manner to disperse loans to qualified disaster victims. In order to accomplish this, the SBA immediately extends an initial loan amount to disaster victims. For all declared disasters, including major declarations and SBA agency declarations, all disaster loans carry an immediate unsecured loan. The limit is $25,000. Unfortunately, the unsecured disaster loan limit for physical damage loans under an SBA agency declaration will decrease to $14,000 before the end of the year unless we act, and that's what we're doing. The SBA has studied these levels and has requested that Congress make the $25,000 limit permanent. To ensure continuity for disaster victims when they need it most, H.R. 277 codifies and makes permanent that amount, the $25,000 unsecured loan limit. I fully support this common sense legislation, urge my colleagues to vote for it, and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on H.R. 277? Okay, seeing none, I recognize myself briefly. There is little doubt that natural disaster not only harm the victims, but reflect our nation's ability to provide assistance. This legislation is a much-needed response to the record-breaking disasters and an effective preparation tool for the upcoming hurricane season. Again, I thank the ranking member for his support, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill. If there is no further discussion, the committee will move to consideration of H.R. 277. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 277, the access to sufficient
Without
capital.
objection, H.R. 277 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 277. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 277 is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 277 to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 277 is reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation, make other necessary technical corrections, and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall also be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental dissenting and minority views. The next bill is H.R. 2142, a bill to ease regulatory compliance for small businesses. It was introduced by Mr. Delgado of New York and co-sponsored by Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania. This bipartisan legislation will help provide transparency and clarity for small businesses. I would like to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Delgado, the sponsor of the bill, for an opening statement on H.R. 2142.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I truly appreciate your leadership. I am very proud to see the Small Business Committee take up this bipartisan common sense legislation that my friend and colleague, Dr. Joyce, and I introduced to reduce the regulatory burden for small businesses. Under the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act, federal agencies are required to publish small business compliance guides for certain regulations. However, these guides are housed on different agency websites, making it difficult for small businesses to find and utilize them, and hard for Congress to oversee. Our bill would make these guides more accessible by creating a centralized one-stop shop online for small business owners who often lack the resources to hire staff to focus on compliance issues. The bill would also list contact information for the appropriate agency staff who could provide regulatory assistance to small businesses. My main goal on this committee is to ensure that small businesses across my district have the tools and resources they need to grow. I am excited to see this bill go through the committee process and hope to see it pass. Thanks again, Dr. Joyce, for your leadership. Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and I thank him for his leadership on this issue. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on H.R. 2142? The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Dr. Joyce, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I seek recognition to ask my colleagues' support for H.R. 2142. Before I speak on the bill, I want to thank the gentleman from New York, Mr. Delgado, for working with me on this important issue in a bipartisan way. I look forward to continue to working with you in this manner in future endeavors. When you're a small business owner, few things are as valuable as your time, and too much of it is often spent navigating the complex world of federal compliance. As a small business owner myself, I can personally attest to the daunting feeling associated with new regulations. Navigating this bureaucracy of the federal government can be incredibly intimidating, and many small businesses fall out of compliance largely because they do not know where to turn for assistance. H.R. 2142, as Mr. Delgado pointed out, is a common-sense, good government and transparency bill. it would require the Small Business and Agriculture Regulatory Enforcement Ombudsman to create a public website to provide the compliance guidelines required by Section 212 of the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act, or SBREFA. Any time an agency is required to produce a final regulatory flexibility analysis on a role, the agency is also required by Section 212 of SBRA to publish one or more guidelines to assist small entities in complying with this role. Madam Chair, these reports are often compiled by the Ombudsman and are available to small firms who request them. However, making them publicly available on a centralized website is this common sense way to ease the regulatory burden on small firms, as it makes it much easier for them to know where to go when they need this more information. Finally, our bill makes another common sense change by requiring the Ombudsman to publish on the website the contact information for a person who can offer assistance to small entities with respect to the roles and the guides referred to them. Since joining the Small Business Committee, I have been surprised to learn how many resources are available, but underutilized because businesses are simply unaware that they exist or unsure how to access them. This legislation takes an important step towards breaking down the barriers between the administration and the small businesses by simply making available information and making it much more accessible. I again thank my colleague, Mr. Delgado, for bringing this issue to my attention, and the Chairwoman for allowing the Small Business Committee to shine a much-needed light to the complex world of federal compliance for small business. I am incredibly proud to be a member of this committee and of its commitment to advancing in a bipartisan fashion solutions which can make a real difference on day-to-day operations of small businesses across the United States. I simply ask each of my colleagues to support this measure and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized? Mr. Burchett is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I don't think this will take 5 minutes. I was just, and I'm not sure of the parliamentary situation we're in. I just had a question about some wording, and I've seen it in several other pieces of legislation, and maybe one of the attorneys could further confuse me on the facts. But at the end, I noticed this in the last and the other bills, it says the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act of 1996 for the year covered by such annual report. Does this mean that this is retroactive, or does it mean the year that was stated in the report, which would be the current year going forward? Does that make sense? And I apologize for not getting with y'all sooner.
The council? Yes.
Our understanding is that it would be moving forward, going forward.
I can't hear her.
It is not retroactive. It's going forward.
Thank you so much, and I apologize.
Okay. The gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself briefly. The legislation requires the SBA's Office of the National Ombudsman to create a centralized website with hyperlinks to small entity compliance guides and contacts at federal agencies who could provide small businesses with compliance assistance. We know that small business owners do not necessarily have the resources and time to navigate multiple websites to fully understand their responsibility with federal laws. This bill will make it easier, not harder, to comply with federal regulations by providing them a one-stop shop for compliance assistance. I commend Representative Delgado and Dr. Joyce for working together in a bipartisan manner to help cut the red tape for small businesses, and I urge my colleagues to support the measure. The gentleman, Mr. Chabot, ranking member, will be recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't take 5 minutes. I'll be very brief. I just want to also commend Mr. Delgado and Dr. Joyce for working together to put forward some legislation which I really do believe will make it easier for small businesses to comply with federal regulations. So I just want to commend both sides working together, and the first term, well done. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, and the gentleman yields back. If there is no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 2142. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2142, to amend the Small Business Act. to
Without
require-
objection, H.R. 2142 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2142. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2142 is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2142 to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 2142 is reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and make other necessary technical corrections and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall also be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental, dissenting, and minority views. The next bill is H.R. 1649. The Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act of 2019, which was introduced by the ranking member, Mr. Chabot of Ohio, and co-sponsored by Mr. Evans of Pennsylvania. This piece of legislation helps small business development centers, or SBDCs, become better equipped to assist small businesses with their cybersecurity needs. I now recognize the ranking member for his statement on H.R. 1649.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Information technology is a necessity for small businesses because it equips them with the tools they need to be competitive in the global economy. Unfortunately, small businesses are becoming increasingly popular targets for cyber criminals. The average cost of a cyber attack on a small business is over $30,000, which can destroy a small business. And we had hearings in the last Congress, and we had evidence of that, small business folks, that this has actually happened to. And the figure that we had seen was like 60% of small businesses that undergo one of these attacks actually end up going out of business. So it can be devastating. And then those people that work for that small business lose their jobs. That's an example of why Chairwoman Velasquez, Mr. Evans, and I introduced H.R. 1649, the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act, excuse me, of 2019. I'd also like to thank Mr. Balderson for his early co-sponsorship of this legislation as well. This bipartisan legislation establishes a cyber counseling certification program in lead SBDCs to better assist small businesses with planning and implementing cybersecurity measures to defend against cyber attacks. Excuse me. The cyber assistance offered by trained staff at SBDCs would be provided at no or low cost to small businesses. Cyber planning assistance will encourage small businesses to take a more proactive approach to defending themselves from cyber attacks by leveraging the expertise from SBDCs and their partner agencies and institutions. This bill utilizes existing federal resources to cover the reimbursement costs, so we're not adding additional costs to a budget that's already at stress with over $20 trillion that we all owe. We recognize cyber threats are ever evolving and will continue to work with industry to ensure that appropriate staffing needs are met. I urge my colleagues to support the measure. I again want to thank Mr. Evans especially for his leadership on this over the years, Mr. Balderson as well, and the ranking member as well, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you. And are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on H.R. 1649? The gentleman from Pennsylvania is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Evans.
Chairwoman Vasquez and Ranking Member Chavit and colleagues on the Small Business Committee. I speak now to offer my support for H.R. 1649, the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act. I'm proud to co-lead this bipartisan piece of legislation with my colleague, Chairwoman Vasquez, and the Ranking Member Chavit. Today, we have the opportunity to present real pieces of legislation that have the potential truly to help small businesses. As you know, I consider small businesses to be the foundation of our communities. They are the engines that drive innovation, investment, and economic development. They are the pillars that prop up our communities. In my home state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have nearly 1 million small businesses, employing 2.5 million workers, accounting for 46.7% of the workforce for the entire state. Small firms account for 99.6% of my state employers. Across the U.S., there are nearly 30 million small businesses supporting almost 59 million jobs. Small firms account for approximately 99.9% of U.S. businesses. Needless to say, small businesses are the drivers in our community, often filling space in neighborhoods that large companies fail to reach. At the same time, our society has been and still is going through a technological revolution. Yet as technology makes things easier, it is also open to vulnerabilities. The same tools that we are making our lives better, like on-demand services, digital wallets, and social networks, we was also making our information easier to access for both good and bad actors. In the past decade, we have seen time and time again those bad actors engage in cyber attacks, stealing information from businesses and government agencies. In 2014, it was discovered that the U.S. government owned Office of Personnel Management was hacked, resulting in theft of over 20 million records. In 2013, criminal broke into the Target database, stealing the financial information of millions of customers. As one of the largest U.S. retail chains, Target eventually reported that some 40 million credit and debit numbers were stolen. Breaches have also been reported at Home Depot, J.T. Morgan Chase, and Sony. These breaches can have devastating impact on businesses. Sales may decline as shoppers turn elsewhere. According to the Congressional Research Service, Target reported that its U.S. sales for that quarter decreased 2.5% and was meaningfully softened following the announcement of the data breach. Now, if major entities like Target, Home Depot, and the U.S. government struggle with the challenges of cybersecurity, what chances do our small businesses have? The Small Business Development Center cyber training was written to migrate small businesses' cybersecurity risk by providing training resources for small businesses to better equip themselves against cyber attack. This bill instructs the Small Business Administration to provide cyber counseling for local small businesses by first certifying SBA employees as their small business development centers, who would then provide assistance to small businesses for planning cybersecurity practices and strategies to respond to cyber attacks. I appreciate having the opportunity to co-lead this important piece of legislation. It is critical that we help our small businesses, the backbone of our nation economy, ensure that they are given the training they need to secure them back. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself briefly. America's entrepreneurs have always been vital to technological growth and advancement, but they have also been vulnerable to cyber attacks and data breaches because of the complexity and costs associated with identifying, monitoring, and sharing information with appropriate agencies. Only 31% of small firms have cybersecurity plans in place. Perhaps this is related to a mere 14% of small businesses having a plan in place for keeping their company cyber secure. Cybersecurity is top priority for the small business community, and this committee has taken that duty seriously by presenting 3 bills focusing on improving cybersecurity training, protection, and awareness for small businesses. The first of those bills today, H.R. 1649, directs the SBA to implement a cybersecurity certification program to ensure counselors in the SBA network of small business development centers are equipped to educate firms and help develop cyber strategies. Cybercrime is one of the greatest risks to every business in the world. This legislation ensures that our nation's most vulnerable businesses are prepared to combat this imminent threat. I'd like to thank Ranking Member Chabot and Vice Chairman Evans for working together on this important legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill. If there is no further discussion, the committee will move on to consideration of H.R. 1649. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
HR 1649, the Small Business Development
Without
Center.
objection, H.R. 1649 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 1649. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1649 is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 1649 to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 1649 is reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and make other necessary technical corrections and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall also be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental, dissenting, and minority views. The next bill is H.R. 1648, the Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2019, which was introduced by the ranking member, Mr. Chabot of Ohio, and co-sponsored by myself. This bill aims to increase the defensive measures available for small businesses affected by or concerned by cyber attacks. I will now recognize the ranking member for his statement on H.R. 1648.
I thank the gentlelady. H.R. 1648, the Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancements Act of 2019, builds on the reforms of the bill just reported, H.R. 1648. This bipartisan legislation, introduced by myself and Ranking Member Velasquez and co-sponsored by Mr. Balderson, aims to increase the defensive measures available for small businesses undergoing or concerned about a cyber attack. Excuse me. It would incentivize additional information sharing between private sector and the federal government. We have heard from small business owners, cybersecurity experts, and government officials, and there's no question that improving cybersecurity for America's small businesses should be an urgent priority for most small firms. Over the past few years, the federal government has stepped up its efforts to both prevent and mitigate cyber attacks by coordinating and distributing cybersecurity resources directly to small businesses. This is a good thing, but we must increase information sharing between the federal government and small businesses to ensure that they have every resource possible to combat cyber threats. That means we must give small businesses the confidence they need to engage with the federal agencies tasked with protecting them. Our bipartisan legislation seeks to safeguard small businesses from cyber attacks in a few simple ways. First, the bill establishes SBDCs as the primary liaison for small businesses that share cybersecurity information with the federal government. This bill also ensures that small businesses that engage with SBDCs receive the same protections and exemptions provided by the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, or CISA. Further, this bill would ensure that any policies or rulemaking adopted by any federal agency as a result of federal information sharing does not unfairly burden small businesses. It would also expand liability protections for small businesses that engage with the federal government in good faith. Ultimately, this legislation removes the barriers many small business owners face when confronted with a cyber threat, encouraging them to work with the federal government and not fear it. I urge my colleagues to support the bill and yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and I thank him for his continued leadership on this very important issue. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on H.R. 1648? Seeing none, I will recognize myself for a brief comment. H.R. 1648 recognizes that the federal government and U.S. businesses must work together to effectively fight cybercrime. Proactive collaboration and information sharing are essential to combating the rapidly evolving cyber threats that plague our country. However, many small businesses lack the information needed to develop adequate cybersecurity strategies and are reluctant to report cyber threat indicators to the federal government. The Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2019 will encourage good faith collaboration between small businesses and the federal government by providing additional resources and protections for small businesses. Specifically, the bill establishes small business cybersecurity assistant units to connect small businesses to the federal government cybersecurity resources and receive cyber threat indicators from small businesses. This bill protects small businesses by ensuring that the SBA Office of Advocacy has a seat at the table when policies are being implemented because of the information sharing. H.R. 1648 also provides liability protections for small businesses that engage in information sharing. Tackling sophisticated cyber threats requires a joint effort, and legislation will implement a coordinated and proactive approach to protecting our country from cybercrime. I am a proud co-sponsor of the Ranking Member's Bill, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it. If there is no further discussion, the committee will move on to consideration of H.R. 1648. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1648, the Small Business Advanced Cybersecurity Enhancement Act.
Without objection, H.R. 1648 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 1648. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1648 is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 1648 to the House. All those in favor say aye. 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 All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 1648 is reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation, make other necessary technical corrections, and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall also be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental, dissenting, and minority views. The next and third cyber bill is H.R. 2331. The SBA Cyber Awareness Act of 2019, which was introduced by Mr. Proud from Colorado and co-sponsored by Mr. Balderson from Ohio. This legislation takes important steps to strengthen the Small Business Administration cybersecurity infrastructure to handle and report cyber threats that affect small businesses. I will now like to recognize the gentleman from Colorado, the sponsor of the bill, for an opening statement on H.R. 2331.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of our bill, the SBA Cyber Awareness Act. I believe there is something uniquely American about starting a small business. As anyone will tell you, starting a small business is never easy. It requires hard work, grit, and hustle, the same entrepreneurial spirit that drove the pioneers west to Colorado, and that today makes the American economy the strongest in the world. Too often, small business owners are overworked, wearing multiple hats and balancing a variety of responsibilities, from payroll to maintenance, customer service to marketing. And as any small business owner or employee will attest, no task is too small. Running a small business is truly an all-hands-on-deck effort. Like any new and challenging endeavor, our nation's small businesses are at their most vulnerable when they are presented with something unexpected. Whether it's unanticipated downward market trends, natural disasters, or cyber attacks. To the latter point, according to one recent study, 47% of small businesses have suffered a cyber attack in the past 12 months. There is more that we can do to protect our nation's entrepreneurs from cybercrime. And it's not just small businesses. In 2015, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management was hacked, compromising the data security of nearly 22 million Americans. We need to ensure that every arm of the federal government is safeguarded, including the SBA. Our bill, which I had the pleasure of introducing 2 weeks ago, along with my friend from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, requires the SBA to undertake a series of efforts to ensure that it and our nation's small businesses are protected from cyber attacks. Specifically, it requires the SBA to audit its IT and cybersecurity infrastructure. the administration's strategy to improve cybersecurity protections, any equipment used by the SBA and manufactured by a company headquartered in China, and any incident of cyber risk at the SBA and the agency's actions to confront it. Finally, recognizing that a cyber attack to the agency could put the sensitive information and intellectual property of small businesses at risk, the bill would require SBA to notify Congress of future breaches with information on those affected and how the breach occurred. I know all members of this committee understand the incredible impact small businesses have on our communities, and I imagine all of us here have experienced some form of cyber attack, whether it be in the form of a phishing email or identity theft. I urge my colleagues to support our bill, and I thank the chairwoman for the opportunity to speak on its behalf. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the co-sponsor of the bill, Mr. Balderson from Ohio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the time, Madam Chair, and thank you for being an original co-sponsor of this important piece of legislation. I would also like to thank Ranking Member Shabbat for his support of this bill. I want to quickly say that I am a co-sponsor on the Ranking Member's two cybersecurity bills, H.R. 1648 and 1649. I am confident that these two bills will help small business owners prepare for and overcome modern and digital obstacles. Along that same line, I am a proud original co-sponsor of Subcommittee Chairman Crow's SBA Cyber Awareness Act of 2019. Because this bill addresses potential weakness within the Small Business Administration's cybersecurity infrastructure. By passing this bill, we will proactively guard against harmful and widespread cyber attacks by bringing the Small Business Administration's cybersecurity defenses into the 21st century. This bill will protect the sensitive business and personal information of millions of small business owners across the country. In a rapid developing digital age, strong cybersecurity protections and reinforcements are the utmost importance. This is especially true for fragile small businesses that rely having secure online presence for e-commerce transactions, data collection and storage, and hosting intellectual property, yet don't have the same infrastructure as larger corporations equipped to deal with cyber attacks. A threat to cybersecurity is a threat to small businesses' vitality. That's why this bill is so That's why this bill is so important. This is a bipartisan, common-sense legislation. I want to especially thank my good friend, Chairman Crow, also for his leadership on this effort. It is nice to see Congress proactively attempting to solve problems before they occur, rather than waiting until something goes wrong and reacting. Again, I stress that our digital world change is constant and happens quickly. We as Congress must lift up the small businesses of America and ensure they have the support they need to address this ever-changing online environment. Once again, I thank the Chair and Ranking Member for their support. I thank my colleague from Colorado for his proactive leadership, and I urge the committee's support of H.R. 2331. With that, I yield back my remaining time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Shabbat, for a statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in the interest of time, rather than read my entire statement, I'll just commend Mr. Crow and Mr. Balderson for working together in a bipartisan manner on this. It's great to see Ohio and Colorado working together. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and me too. I want to thank both Representative Crow and Representative Balderson for working together to ensure that millions of small businesses can protect their data, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. If there is no further discussion, the committee will move on to consideration of H.R. 2331. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2331, the SBA Cyber
Without
Awareness.
objection, H.R. 2331 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2331. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2331 is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2331 to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 2331 is reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation, make other necessary technical corrections, and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall also be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental dissenting and minority views. Our final bill today is H.R. 2345, the clarifying the Small Business Runway Act of 2019, which was introduced by Mr. Stauber from Minnesota and co-sponsored by Mr. Golden from Maine. This bipartisan bill clarifies the intent of Congress in the implementation of the Small Business Runway Extension Act, which we successfully passed into law last year. I would now like to recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, the sponsor of the bill, for an opening statement on H.R. 2345.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Shabbat. H.R. 2345 clarifies the Small Business Runway Extension Act. It is a bill that attempts to do exactly what it says, to make clear the intent of the Small Business Runway Extension Act of 2018. The Runway Act of 2018 was simple, straightforward, and unambiguous. It simply extended the Small Business Administration's receipt-based size calculation from a 3-year average to a 5-year average. Recognizing the significance of this bill for small business, the Runway Act easily passed through both House and Senate, becoming law on December 17th of 2018. Within 4 days of the law's passage, the SBA installed its implementation, issuing an information notice that effectively contradicted the Runway Act of 2018 by maintaining the 3-year calculation until the agency could go through the rulemaking process. In a subcommittee on contracting and infrastructure hearing held on March 26th, Chairman Jared Golden and I learned that this conflict in law enacted versus regulation adopted imposed significant real-world challenges for small businesses who may be teetering on the edge between quotations small and quotations other than small business status. The need for clarity was a constant and reoccurring theme, and this bill attempts to do exactly that. First, H.R. 2345 makes clear that the Runway Act of 2018 does, in fact, apply to the Small Business Administration and therefore should have become effective on the date it was signed into law. Thus, businesses relying on the 5-year average to remain in their, quote, small business status were correct in their assessment and may continue to do so. Secondly, the bill requires the Small Business Administration to develop a transition plan for small businesses and federal agencies as they shift to the 5-year rule. The transition plan also includes a transition or a buffer period in which firms that benefit from the old 3-year calculation may continue to rely on that formula for a set amount of time as they prepare for the eventual shift to the 5-year average calculation. In short, H.R. 2345 restates the will of Congress as intended in the Runway Act of 2018 and adopts solutions that would create a smooth transition for all parties involved. I would like to thank Member Golden for helping me, and I urge the colleagues, my colleagues, for their support and support of H.R. 2345, which clarifies the Small Business Runway Extension Act. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to thank Representative Stauber for sponsoring this bill and for the work that we were able to do together, having a hearing in the subcommittee about it. Earlier this year, we did have a hearing in the Contracting and Infrastructure Subcommittee and saw that the SBA's failure to rapidly implement the Runway Extension Act created confusion among small businesses who didn't know if they currently qualified for contracting opportunities. One thing I hear from small businesses when I speak with them in Maine is that they want clarity and certainty. By passing this bill, we're going to create certainty where now there's confusion. certainty that a small business should consider the sales over 5 years instead of 3, and certainty that the act applies to the SBA as well as other agencies. I'm hopeful that this bill will, as the original Runway Extension Act was designed, help growing small businesses get themselves in a place where they can compete with titans of industry and multinational corporations. While I'm frustrated that we have to lead the SBA to water and make it drink, I hope that passing this bill will clarify what was already abundantly clear from the previous bill. This is intended to apply to the SBA and be implemented rapidly. I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Schaub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, in the interest of time and getting people to lunch here, I think, because we're getting close to wrapping up, rather than read my opening statement, I would just like to commend Mr. Stauber and Mr. Golden for working together in a bipartisan manner. And also, if Ohio and Colorado can get together, I guess Minnesota and Maine can as well. So we thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I thank him, and I thank both Representative Stauber and Golden for working together, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill. If there is no further discussion, the committee will move on to consideration of H.R. 2345. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2345, the clarifying the small business
Without
runway.
objection, H.R. 2345 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I offer an amendment for consideration.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 2345, offered by Mr. Hagedorn of Minnesota.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't take but just a second. I want to associate myself with the remarks of both Ranking Member Stauber, my fellow Minnesotan, and Subcommittee Chair Mr. Golden, and about this bill. Appreciate this bill. I think it's certainly unfortunate that we had to get to this point, that the executive branch has been dragging its feet. But the purposes of the original law and what's being done today are excellent. All I have is a sense of the Congress to restate exactly in very plain terms what we intend to accomplish, including especially that this bill and the Runway Extension Act includes government-wide acquisition contracts. And as somebody who used to work in the Treasury Department, and I've seen my share of how executive branch employees can sometimes want to do their own thing or ignore the will of the Congress. I just simply wanted to put this out there so it's restated in common sense terms, and that there's no misunderstanding once this bill passes of what the intention of this committee and the House and the Senate, hopefully, as we pass the bill, is intending. So with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and I now recognize Mr. Shabbat for any remarks he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll also be brief on this. This amendment makes clear to the public the intended application and effective date of the Small Business Runway Extension Act of 2018 as envisioned by Congress. I'd like to thank Mr. Hagedorn for his helpful amendment and urge my colleagues to support it and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Are there any other member who wish to be recognized for a statement on the amendment? Well, seeing none, I want to thank the gentleman from Minnesota for offering the amendment, and I appreciate his concern that the Runway Extension Act of 2018 be applied as soon as possible. I too share your frustration that implementation of the law has been delayed, and it was the intent of Congress for the law to go into effect upon enactment. This amendment makes clear, and we are sending a strong message to the executive and to the administration that that was the intent of Congress. So the question now is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for the purposes of offering an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2345 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2345 as amended is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2345 to the House as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 2345 as amended is reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation, make other necessary technical corrections, and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall also be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental, dissenting, and minority views. So let me take this opportunity to thank all the members for being here today and for offering and supporting the bills. I'm proud we have a bipartisan effort today. Taken together, I believe these bills will truly help our nation's small firms, and I look forward to seeing them pass by the committee and through the entire House. So if there is no further business to come before the committee,
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Just one final thing, if I could.
Sure.
I also want to thank the gentlelady for working in a bipartisan fashion, as this committee has done over the years, and passing legislation that both sides agree on. Look forward to doing this in the future, and would recommend that all members do the same thing, because you can actually get things passed in this committee, which isn't necessarily true in some of the other committees around this place. So thank you, and yield back.
Well, I'm happy that we took you away from the judiciary hearings and had been able to lower your blood pressure. So if there is no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.